I stood in the elevator with a cardboard box watching the floor numbers descend as my 6 years at Morrison Financial crumbled around me. Just hours ago, I was the senior payroll coordinator who kept 300 employees paid on time every month. Now I'm unemployed because Brad, the new MBA hire, convinced upper management that my outdated Excel system needed to be replaced immediately. The elevator dings at the lobby, and I step into unemployment clutching the box containing my desk plant and coffee mug, unaware that chaos is already brewing upstairs. The drive home felt surreal, like I was floating through someone else's nightmare. My name is Vivian Carter, and until this morning I thought I had job security that could weather any corporate storm. I started at Morrison Financial 6 years ago as a junior accountant fresh out of State University with my business degree and dreams of building something meaningful in the corporate world. Back then, Morrison Financial was growing rapidly, but still used a patchwork of outdated systems that barely communicated with each other. The payroll department was a disaster zone of paper timesheets, manual calculations, and constant errors that left employees frustrated and management scrambling. Janet Rodriguez, the HR director who hired me, took one look at my transcript featuring advanced Excel and database courses and decided I was exactly what they needed. Those early months were intense. I spent countless evenings and weekends learning every aspect of our payroll requirements. Morrison Financial wasn't just a simple office with salary employees. We had hourly warehouse workers with complex overtime calculations, commissioned salespeople with territory-based bonuses, part-time customer service representatives with variable schedules, and management staff with profit-sharing arrangements. The existing system couldn't handle the complexity, so I built something from scratch. Not just basic Excel spreadsheets, but an integrated system using advanced formulas, macros, and database connections that could handle everything Morrison Financial needed. I created lookup tables for tax rates across 3 states where we had employees. I programmed automatic calculations for overtime that factored in both daily and weekly thresholds. I designed commission structures that could handle base salaries plus percentage bonuses based on individual performance, team performance, and company profitability metrics. The system I created connected payroll to benefits enrollment, so when someone changed their health insurance election, it automatically updated their deductions. It linked to our expense reporting system, so reimbursements appeared seamlessly on paychecks. It integrated with our time tracking system, pulling hours directly from electronic timesheets and calculating pay based on employee classifications and current wage rates. Mr. Morrison himself, the company founder who started the business 30 years ago in his garage, praised my work publicly during company meetings. He understood that reliable payroll wasn't just about cutting checks, it was about maintaining employee trust and avoiding costly compliance mistakes. My system had never missed a payroll deadline, never miscalculated taxes, and had saved the company thousands of dollars in potential penalties by catching errors before they reached government agencies. Then Brad Sullivan arrived 3 weeks ago. 28 years old, fresh MBA from Wharton, hired as Operations Improvement Specialist with a mandate to modernize our processes. Brad walked through the office like he owned the place, wearing expensive suits and carrying a leather portfolio filled with consultant reports about digital transformation. He took one look at my Excel-based system and dismissed it as primitive spreadsheet work that belonged in the 1990s. Brad convinced management that we needed expensive payroll software that would automate everything and eliminate human error. He showed them slick presentations about cloud-based solutions and artificial intelligence. He threw around terms like scalability and integration without understanding what our current system actually did or why it worked so well. I tried to explain the complexity involved in switching systems. I showed him the intricate connections between payroll and other departments. I warned him about the time needed to properly test new software with our specific requirements. I documented the risks of rushing implementation without adequate preparation. Brad dismissed every concern as resistance to change from someone stuck in outdated thinking. This morning, Brad marched into the executive conference room with a PowerPoint presentation titled Payroll Modernization Initiative. He told Mr. Morrison and the other executives that keeping me around would only slow down progress. He said they needed someone with modern skills to implement cutting-edge solutions. He actually used the phrase, "We have an MBA now," when referring to his ability to handle payroll better than I could. 2 hours later, Janet appeared at my desk with a security guard and an empty box. She looked miserable as she explained that my position was being eliminated immediately to make way for new systems and new leadership. The guard watched me pack my personal items and escorted me to the elevator, just like I was some kind of security threat instead of someone who had dedicated 6 years to keeping this company running smoothly. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone rang. Sarah Martinez from accounting was calling, and her voice was shaking with panic. "Vivian, you need to know what's happening here. Brad implemented the new payroll system this afternoon, and everything is completely destroyed. The whole database crashed. All the employee information got corrupted somehow. Payroll for Friday is 4 days away, and nobody knows how to fix anything. Brad is running around the office yelling at people, and Mr. Morrison is demanding answers that nobody has." My stomach dropped. Friday payroll meant 300 families depending on their paychecks to pay mortgages, buy groceries, and cover medical bills. Friday payroll meant commissioned salespeople expecting thousands of dollars they had earned through months of hard work. Friday payroll meant hourly workers counting on overtime pay to make ends meet. "Sarah, how bad is the corruption? Can they restore from backups?" "That's the worst part, Vivian." Brad insisted on immediately deleting the old system to prevent people from reverting back. He said it would force everyone to adapt to the new software. But the new software can't read any of our historical data, and now the old backups won't work either because he changed all the file structures. I sat in my car staring at my house while the magnitude of the disaster sank in. Brad had just destroyed 6 years of carefully built systems and eliminated the only person who understood how to fix them. 300 employees would discover on Friday that their financial security had been sacrificed for one man's ego and ignorance. Wednesday morning brought news that made my termination look like a minor inconvenience compared to the catastrophe unfolding at Morrison Financial. Sarah called me before 7 o'clock, her voice tight with exhaustion and fear. "Vivian, nobody slept last night. The IT department worked until 3 in the morning trying to recover the data, but it's hopeless. Marcus Chen in IT says Brad's new software corrupted everything when it tried to import our employee records. The system shows people earning negative wages overtime calculations that make no sense, and commission structures that would bankrupt the company if we actually paid them." Marcus Chen, our IT director for the past 8 years, had actually warned against Brad's rushed timeline. Marcus understood technology better than anyone at Morrison Financial, and he knew that complex system migrations required careful planning and extensive testing. But Brad had dismissed Marcus as another obstacle to progress, insisting that modern software was designed to handle migrations automatically. I poured coffee with shaking hands while Sarah described the expanding disaster. The new payroll system couldn't handle Morrison Financial's structure at all. Our commissioned salespeople had complex arrangements where base salaries were supplemented by percentage bonuses tied to individual sales team performance and overall company profitability. The new software treated every payment as either salary or commission, but not combinations of both, resulting in calculations that showed our top salesperson earning over $50,000 for 1 week, while others showed negative earnings. The overtime calculations for hourly employees were equally destroyed. Morrison Financial operated in 3 states with different overtime laws. California required overtime after 8 hours in a single day or 40 hours in a week, whichever came first. Texas only required overtime after 40 hours per week. Nevada had its own rules about consecutive workdays and holiday pay. My original system handled these complexities automatically based on where each employee worked and their classification. Brad's software applied generic overtime rules that violated labor laws in every state where we operated. Doug Patterson in finance is losing his mind, Sarah continued. Doug had been our finance director for 12 years, a methodical man who understood every aspect of our cash flow and budgeting. He can't figure out how much money we actually need for payroll because the calculations are so wrong. The benefits deductions are missing completely, so the system thinks we need to pay everyone their gross wages without any withholdings for health insurance, dental coverage, or retirement contributions. The benefits integration had been one of my proudest achievements. When employees enrolled in health insurance or changed their contribution levels for their 401k plans, my system automatically updated their payroll deductions and notified the insurance companies and investment firms. Linda Thompson, our benefits administrator, depended on that integration to manage enrollment for 300 employees across multiple insurance plans and retirement options. But the personal implications of my firing were becoming impossible to ignore. I was the sole income in my household supporting not just myself, but my mother's ongoing medical treatment. Mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer 8 months ago, and her chemotherapy treatments cost $3,000 per month. Morrison Financial's health insurance covered most of the cost, but losing my job meant losing that coverage exactly when we needed it most. My savings account had exactly $4,700, enough to cover maybe 2 months of basic expenses if I eliminated everything non-essential. Mom's next chemotherapy session was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and without insurance, the full cost would wipe out most of my remaining money. I had 3 job interviews scheduled for the rest of the week, but even if I received an offer immediately, new health insurance wouldn't take effect for at least 30 days. Wednesday afternoon brought news that transformed the payroll disaster into something far more serious. Sarah called again, this time from her car in the Morrison Financial parking lot, because she was afraid to discuss the situation inside the building. Vivian, this is beyond just payroll now. The corrupted data somehow triggered automatic notifications to the IRS about incorrect tax withholdings. The system generated reports showing that Morrison Financial has been under-withholding taxes from employee paychecks for the entire year, which isn't true, but the reports went out automatically before anyone realized what was happening. My blood ran cold. Incorrect tax reporting wasn't just a payroll mistake, it was a federal compliance violation that could trigger audits, penalties, and criminal investigations. The IRS didn't distinguish between intentional tax evasion and system errors when imposing penalties that could reach hundreds of thousands of dollars. Federal auditors are already calling the main office, Sarah whispered. They want to examine all our payroll records for the past year to verify whether we've been withholding and depositing taxes correctly. Mr. Morrison is flying back from his vacation in Europe because his lawyers told him this could threaten the entire company. I hung up and stared at my kitchen wall, trying to process the magnitude of what Brad's incompetence had unleashed. Morrison Financial wasn't just facing a payroll crisis anymore. They were facing potential federal prosecution for tax violations that could result in millions of dollars in penalties and possible criminal charges against executives for willful failure to comply with tax laws. Brad had been placed on administrative leave, which meant he was sitting at home collecting his salary, while 300 employees wondered whether they would receive paychecks on Friday. The man who had convinced management that his MBA made him more qualified than someone with 6 years of hands-on experience was now hiding from the consequences of his arrogance and ignorance. But as I sat in my empty house facing unemployment and my mother's medical bills, I realized something that made my heart race with possibility. Every executive who had supported firing me was now discovering that they had eliminated the only person who could fix their crisis. The expertise they had dismissed as outdated was suddenly the most valuable asset Morrison Financial possessed, and they had thrown it away for the ego of a man who couldn't calculate overtime pay for a single employee. Wednesday evening brought the kind of corporate chaos that becomes legend in business schools. Sarah's updates painted a picture of an organization in complete meltdown, with employees, customers, and government agencies all demanding answers that nobody could provide. The sales department was ready to mutiny. Tom Bradley, Morrison Financial's top salesman, who typically earned $8,000 to $10,000 monthly in commissions, discovered that Brad's system calculated his November earnings at negative $43. Tom had been negotiating a major contract with a manufacturing company, a deal worth over $200,000 in revenue to Morrison Financial, but he was now threatening to jump to our biggest competitor along with his client relationships. Patricia Williams, a single mother working in customer service, faced a different kind of crisis. Patricia depended on her weekly paycheck to cover childcare, rent, and groceries for her 2 elementary school children. The thought of missing Friday's payroll sent her into panic because she had exactly $37 in her checking account and no family support to fall back on. Patricia represented dozens of employees living paycheck to paycheck who couldn't survive even a brief payroll delay. James Rodriguez, our warehouse supervisor, had been counting on this week's overtime pay to make his daughter's college tuition payment. James regularly worked 50 to 60 hours per week during our busy season, and his overtime earnings were earmarked for educational expenses that couldn't be delayed. His daughter was a junior at the local state university, studying to become a nurse, and missing the tuition deadline would force her to withdraw from classes. These weren't just numbers in a payroll system. These were real people whose financial security had been destroyed by one man's combination of arrogance and incompetence. Meanwhile, federal investigators had arrived at Morrison Financial to begin examining our tax compliance. The automated error reports Brad's system had generated were being taken seriously by the IRS, which meant auditors were now scrutinizing every aspect of our payroll practices for the past year. They wanted to verify that we had been withholding correct amounts for federal income taxes, Social Security contributions, Medicare payments, and state tax obligations across 3 states. The investigation revealed how sophisticated my original system had actually been. The federal auditors were impressed by the detailed records and precise calculations they found in the historical data. Every tax withholding was documented and cross-referenced with current tax tables. Every Social Security and Medicare deduction was calculated to the penny and properly allocated. Every state tax obligation was handled according to the specific requirements of California, Texas, and Nevada tax codes. But Brad's system had destroyed the integration that made those calculations possible. The new software couldn't access the tax tables, couldn't handle multi-state requirements, and couldn't process the complex withholdings required for employees who worked across state lines or earned income in multiple categories. While Morrison Financial burned, I was facing my own desperate situation. I had spent the day driving to job interviews, trying to project confidence while internally panicking about my mother's medical expenses. The first interview was with a small accounting firm that offered a salary 30% lower than my Morrison Financial wage and no health insurance for the first 6 months. The second interview was with a large corporation that wouldn't make hiring decisions for at least 3 weeks, far too late to help with immediate expenses. The third interview was the most promising, but also the most heartbreaking. A growing technology company needed someone with advanced Excel skills to develop financial reporting systems. The hiring manager was impressed by my experience and the complexity of systems I had built at Morrison Financial. But when she asked why I was leaving my current position, I had to explain that I had been fired for refusing to support a rushed system change that violated best practices. Driving home from that interview, my phone rang with a call that changed everything. The caller ID showed Mr. Morrison's direct office line, the number I had only seen during company-wide emergencies or major announcements. "Vivian, this is Bob Morrison. I know this is highly irregular, but I need to speak with you immediately about the situation here." Mr. Morrison's voice carried a strain I had never heard before. Bob Morrison had built his company from a 2-person operation in his garage to a 300-employee business serving clients across the western United States. He had survived economic recessions, industry changes, and competitive threats by making smart decisions and trusting experienced people. Now his voice revealed a man confronting the possibility that one bad decision might destroy everything he had spent 30 years building. "The federal investigators have told me something that I need you to understand. They say that only someone who built the original system could potentially recover the corrupted data and fix the tax reporting errors before Friday's deadline. The penalties we're facing could exceed $2 million, and that's if we can prove the violations were accidental rather than intentional." I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding as I realized the implications of his call. Morrison Financial, a company worth millions of dollars, was completely dependent on my knowledge and expertise. The executives who had fired me for being outdated were now discovering that my experience was the only thing standing between their company and federal prosecution. "Mr. Morrison, I appreciate you calling, but your legal team told you not to contact me, didn't they?" There was a long pause before he answered. "My lawyers are concerned about wrongful termination lawsuits, and they've advised me not to have direct contact with you. But Vivian, we're looking at the potential end of Morrison Financial. 300 families depend on this company for their livelihood, and I can't let one man's mistake destroy everything we've built together." Just then, I heard voices in the background, and Mr. Morrison said, "I have to go. My attorney just walked in. But please, Vivian, consider what I've told you. I know we made a terrible mistake, and I'm hoping we can find a way to fix this before it's too late." The line went dead, leaving me sitting on the side of the road with the full weight of the situation crashing down on me. Morrison Financial, the company that had fired me for doing my job correctly, was now completely at my mercy. 300 employees who had watched me get escorted out with a security guard were now depending on me to save their paychecks, and I was the only person in the world who could help them. Thursday morning arrived with Morrison Financial staring into an abyss of corporate destruction that extended far beyond payroll. Sarah called me at 6:30, her voice hollow with exhaustion and defeat. "Vivian, it's over. Everything is falling apart so fast that we can't even track all the problems anymore. 3 major clients terminated their contracts yesterday because billing errors connected to the payroll system failure affected their invoices too. Apparently, Brad's software corrupted more than just employee data." Morrison Financial's 3 largest clients represented over 40% of our annual revenue. Henderson Manufacturing had been with us for 15 years, trusting Morrison Financial to handle their complex financial reporting and compliance requirements. Pacific Coast Logistics had grown alongside our company, expanding their contract every year as their business flourished. Desert States Construction had specifically chosen Morrison Financial over larger firms because of our attention to detail and personalized service. All 3 companies received invoices Tuesday showing impossible charges and unexplained fees generated by Brad's malfunctioning software. Henderson Manufacturing's bill included overtime charges for employees who had never worked for them. Pacific Coast Logistics was charged for benefits administration for people who weren't their employees. Desert States Construction received an invoice for payroll services in states where they had no operations. Doug Patterson is having panic attacks, Sarah continued. The bank froze our payroll account yesterday because the federal investigation triggered automatic fraud alerts. We can't access the money to pay employees, even if we could figure out how much to pay them. Morrison Financial banked with First National, where we had maintained accounts for 22 years without a single compliance issue. But when federal investigators began examining our tax reporting, the bank's automated systems flagged our accounts for potential money laundering and tax evasion. The freeze would remain in place until federal agencies confirmed that Morrison Financial wasn't engaged in criminal financial activities. The employee situation had deteriorated beyond crisis into complete breakdown. A walkout was planned for Thursday afternoon, organized by Tom Bradley and supported by employees across every department. Tom had contacted our 3 biggest competitors and received immediate job offers with signing bonuses to compensate for missing Morrison Financial's final payroll. Patricia Williams had tearfully submitted her resignation because she couldn't risk missing another paycheck. James Rodriguez was updating his resume and contacting other warehouse operations that needed experienced supervisors. Even worse, Sarah whispered, the union representatives for our warehouse workers arrived this morning. They're claiming that Brad's payroll failure constitutes willful violation of our labor agreements, and they're threatening grievance procedures that could tie us up in court for years. Morrison Financial's warehouse employees belonged to Local 447 of the Teamsters, a relationship that had been cooperative and professional throughout my tenure. The union contract included specific provisions about timely payment of wages and accurate calculation of overtime. Brad's system failure violated multiple contract clauses and potentially gave the union grounds to strike or terminate the agreement entirely. 2 department heads had already submitted formal resignations. Kelly Jang, who managed our customer service department, cited loss of confidence in management's decision-making after watching them fire their most competent employee and replace her with someone who destroyed the entire company in 3 weeks. Michael Torres, who oversaw accounts receivable, explained in his resignation letter that he couldn't stay with a company that prioritized MBA credentials over demonstrated competence. The local business media had discovered Morrison Financial's meltdown. The Business Journal ran a story titled, "Financial Services Firm Faces Federal Investigation After Payroll System Disaster," describing how Morrison Financial had terminated an experienced employee and immediately suffered complete system failure. The article quoted anonymous sources describing Brad as incompetent and suggesting that Morrison Financial's management had prioritized education credentials over practical knowledge. But Brad's complete incompetence was becoming even more apparent under federal scrutiny. When investigators questioned him about the system implementation, Brad couldn't explain basic payroll concepts like gross-to-net calculations or federal withholding tables. His understanding of payroll was entirely theoretical, based on textbook knowledge rather than practical experience. Federal investigators discovered that Brad's MBA thesis on operational efficiency was purely academic with no real-world implementation experience. His resume had exaggerated his previous achievements, claiming credit for system improvements that he had only observed from a distance. He couldn't answer technical questions about the software he had selected or the integration requirements he had ignored. While Brad collected his administrative leave salary at home, Morrison Financial was discovering that his system selection had been fundamentally flawed. The software he chose was designed for simple payroll situations with single-state operations and straightforward compensation structures. It couldn't handle Morrison Financial's complexity and should never have been considered for our implementation. But my personal situation was reaching a breaking point too. My mother's next chemotherapy session was scheduled for Tuesday, and without Morrison Financial's health insurance, the treatment would cost $3,800. My savings account couldn't cover both the medical expenses and my basic living costs for more than a few weeks. During my job search research, however, I had discovered something that changed my entire perspective on the situation. While reviewing employment law websites and wrongful termination information, I learned that Morrison Financial's firing of me might have violated federal whistleblower protection statutes. My documented concerns about Brad's rushed timeline and potential compliance risks could constitute protected activity under federal law. Employees who raise concerns about potential legal violations are supposed to be protected from retaliation, and firing someone for opposing dangerous practices might be illegal regardless of company policies or at-will employment provisions. An employment attorney I consulted during a free consultation confirmed that my case had strong merit. The attorney estimated that my potential damages for wrongful termination and whistleblower retaliation could exceed $500,000, plus the possibility of getting my job back with full back pay and legal fees. Thursday afternoon arrived with Morrison Financial in complete organizational collapse. The planned employee walkout began at 2 o'clock with workers from every department gathering in the parking lot to demand answers about their paychecks and job security. Local news crews arrived to film the demonstration, creating additional negative publicity for a company already under federal investigation. Inside the building, the executive team was meeting in emergency session with lawyers, accountants, and federal regulators. The conference room that had hosted Brad's presentation about payroll modernization 3 weeks ago was now filled with people trying to prevent criminal prosecution and bankruptcy. At 4:17 that afternoon, my phone rang with a call that confirmed everything I had suspected about my position and power in this situation. Janet Rodriguez was calling from her personal cell phone, clearly trying to avoid detection by other executives or their attorneys. "Vivian, I'm going to tell you something that could get me fired, but I can't watch this company die when there might be a way to save it." Janet began, her voice shaking with emotion. "The entire executive team is considering selling Morrison Financial to avoid bankruptcy, but the federal investigation has made us essentially worthless. No buyer will touch a company facing potential criminal prosecution for tax violations." Janet explained that the only way to save Morrison Financial and 300 jobs was to completely restore the original payroll system and fix all the federal reporting before Friday's deadline. The executives had finally accepted that Brad's replacement system was completely unusable and that only my expertise could resolve the crisis. "Vivian, I know they treated you terribly, and I know you have every right to walk away and let this place burn down, but I'm not asking for the company's sake. I'm asking for the sake of all your former colleagues who are about to lose everything through no fault of their own. Patricia has 2 kids depending on her paycheck. Tom was 6 months away from early retirement. James needs his overtime pay for his daughter's college expenses." Janet's voice broke as she continued. "I've been with Morrison Financial for 18 years, and I've never seen anything like this. We went from being a successful, stable company to facing complete destruction in less than a month, all because we listened to someone who didn't understand what you had built for us." As Thursday evening approached, I sat in my kitchen with the full weight of 300 families' financial security resting on my decision. Morrison Financial had fired me for being right about the risks of rushed system changes. Now they needed me to prove that I had been right all along. The question was whether I would save the people who had watched me get escorted out by security, or whether I would let the company that had discarded my expertise face the consequences of that decision. Thursday evening brought the kind of corporate desperation that transforms arrogant executives into begging supplicants. As I sat in my living room contemplating the magnitude of Morrison Financial's crisis, my phone began ringing with calls from the same people who had celebrated my termination just 4 days earlier. The first call came from Doug Patterson at 7:45. Doug, our finance director, who had nodded approvingly when Brad dismissed my concerns about system integration, now sounded like a man facing personal and professional destruction. "Vivian, I need to be direct with you. We made a catastrophic mistake firing you, and now we're facing bankruptcy and potential criminal charges. The federal investigators have made it clear that only someone with your knowledge of our original system can fix the tax reporting errors before tomorrow's deadline. Without that fix, Morrison Financial will face penalties that exceed our available cash reserves." Doug explained that federal investigators had calculated potential penalties at $2.3 million for incorrect tax reporting, plus additional fines for late correction of the errors. Morrison Financial's total cash reserves and available credit lines totaled $1.8 million, meaning the penalties alone would force immediate bankruptcy. "I'm calling to ask if you would consider returning as an independent contractor to resolve this crisis. We're prepared to pay whatever compensation you require, and we need your answer tonight because there's no time left for alternatives." I thanked Doug for his call and told him I would consider the situation, but that any conversation about returning would require much more than contractor compensation. Then I hung up and waited for the next call. Marcus Chen from IT called at 8:23. Marcus, who had always respected my technical expertise but hadn't defended me against Brad's accusations of being outdated, now needed that outdated knowledge to save his own job. "Vivian, the federal investigators spent 3 hours today trying to understand how your original system handled multi-state tax calculations. They told us it was the most sophisticated payroll setup they had ever examined at a company our size. They can't believe we destroyed something that sophisticated to replace it with software that can't even calculate basic overtime correctly." Marcus explained that federal investigators had been impressed by the documentation and technical architecture of my original system. The integration between payroll benefits tax calculations and reporting had been seamless and error-free. Brad's replacement software couldn't handle even 10% of the functionality that my system had provided automatically. The investigators said that rebuilding what you created would normally take a team of programmers 6 months to a year. But with the Friday deadline, only someone who built the original system could possibly restore functionality in time. Marcus's voice carried genuine respect as he continued, "Vivian, I should have supported you when Brad was attacking your work. I knew your system was sophisticated, and I should have spoken up when he called it primitive. I'm sorry for not defending your expertise when it mattered." The third call came at 9:15 from Janet Rodriguez, this time from the office where she was working late with the executive team and their attorneys. Janet's voice reflected the strain of 18 hours of crisis management and the knowledge that her company's survival depended on convincing someone they had wrongfully terminated to save them. "Vivian, Mr. Morrison asked me to call you with an official offer. We're prepared to immediately reinstate you as payroll director, not just coordinator with a 40% salary increase and complete authority over all payroll-related systems. Additionally, we'll pay $50,000 in immediate compensation for emergency restoration work, and we'll extend our executive health plan to cover your mother's medical expenses." The offer was substantial enough to solve my immediate financial crisis and provide long-term security. But I wasn't ready to accept anything without understanding my complete leverage in the situation. Janet continued with additional details that revealed how desperate Morrison Financial had become. "We're also prepared to immediately terminate Brad Sullivan and issue a formal public apology for your wrongful dismissal. Mr. Morrison will personally sign a letter acknowledging that your termination was a mistake and that your expertise was essential to Morrison Financial's success. After Janet's call, I contacted the employment attorney I had consulted earlier and scheduled an emergency evening appointment. The attorney reviewed Morrison Financial's offer and confirmed that my position was even stronger than I had realized. Vivian, they're offering you terms that admit wrongful termination and whistleblower retaliation. The immediate compensation and salary increase suggests they know they face significant legal exposure. But more importantly, you now have complete leverage over a company worth millions of dollars. Your expertise is the difference between Morrison Financial surviving and facing bankruptcy. The attorney explained that my documented concerns about Brad's implementation timeline could support both wrongful termination and whistleblower protection claims worth far more than Morrison Financial was offering. But she also pointed out that sometimes leverage was more valuable than litigation. You have the power to save 300 jobs and preserve a successful company while also securing your own financial future and professional recognition. That might be more satisfying than spending years in court fighting for monetary damages. As Thursday night progressed toward Friday's payroll deadline, Sarah called with an update that transformed the crisis from corporate disaster into potential criminal prosecution. Vivian, the federal investigators just discovered something horrible. Brad's rushed implementation didn't just corrupt our payroll data, it also violated multiple federal labor laws. The Department of Labor is now involved, and they're saying that Morrison Financial's executives could face criminal charges for willful violation of wage and hour requirements. Sarah explained that Brad's system had been calculating overtime incorrectly for months during testing, but he had hidden the errors from management and proceeded with implementation anyway. When federal investigators examined the testing records, they found evidence that Brad knew his system couldn't handle Morrison Financial's overtime requirements, but implemented it anyway. The Labor Department investigators are treating this as potential criminal negligence because Brad knew the system was flawed, but told management it was ready for implementation. They're saying that executives who approved the implementation based on Brad's false assurances could be criminally liable for willful wage violations. I hung up from Sarah's call with the full realization that Morrison Financial needed me not just to save payroll, but potentially to save executives from federal prosecution. My expertise wasn't just valuable for fixing technical problems anymore. It was essential for proving that Morrison Financial's violations had been caused by employee fraud rather than management negligence. At 11:47 Thursday night, my phone rang with a call from Mr. Morrison's personal attorney. The lawyer's tone carried the gravity of someone discussing life-changing legal consequences rather than simple employment negotiations. Ms. Carter, I'm calling on behalf of Robert Morrison and the Morrison Financial executive team. We need to discuss terms for your immediate return that could potentially save this company and prevent criminal prosecution of several executives. Are you available for an emergency meeting tonight? I looked at my kitchen clock showing 11:50 and realized that Morrison Financial's survival now depended entirely on my decision. The company that had fired me for being right about system implementation risks was now facing exactly the consequences I had warned them about. In 12 hours, Morrison Financial would either successfully process payroll for 300 employees, or they would face bankruptcy, federal prosecution, and complete corporate destruction. And I was the only person who could determine which outcome occurred. Friday morning arrived with Morrison. Financial transformed from a confident corporation into a scene of corporate humiliation where executives who had fired me 4 days earlier now waited desperately for my arrival. At 6:30, I walked through the same lobby where security had escorted me out with a cardboard box, but this time every executive who had supported Brad's takeover was gathered in the conference room preparing to grovel for my help. The building felt different with federal investigators stationed throughout the offices and employees uncertain whether they would receive paychecks at the end of the day. But the most dramatic change was the complete reversal of power dynamics that had led to my termination. Brad Sullivan's belongings sat packed in boxes by the security desk ready for removal. The man who had convinced management that his MBA made him superior to my experience was now facing potential criminal charges for implementing software he knew was defective. Security guards had been instructed to escort Brad from the building if he attempted to return. I walked into the main conference room to find a scene that would have been unimaginable a week earlier. Mr. Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by corporate attorneys and federal investigators. Doug Patterson looked like he hadn't slept in days. Janet Rodriguez appeared ready to cry from exhaustion and stress. Marcus Chen from IT had prepared detailed technical reports documenting the extent of Brad's sabotage. "Vivian," Mr. Morrison began, his voice carrying genuine humility, "I owe you an apology that goes beyond professional courtesy. We made a decision based on credentials and prejudice, rather than performance and knowledge. We fired our most competent employee and replaced her with someone who nearly destroyed everything we've built over 30 years. The federal investigators confirmed what I had suspected about my leverage. Agent Sandra Williams from the Department of Labor explained that Morrison Financial faced potential criminal prosecution unless they could prove that wage violations had resulted from employee fraud rather than management negligence. Ms. Carter, our investigation has revealed that Mr. Sullivan implemented payroll software knowing it couldn't handle your company's overtime requirements. He deliberately concealed testing failures and misrepresented the system's capabilities to senior management. However, proving criminal intent requires demonstrating that Morrison Financial was defrauded rather than negligent in their oversight. Agent Williams continued, "Your expertise is essential not just for restoring payroll functionality, but for documenting how Morrison Financial's original system complied with all federal requirements. That documentation could be the difference between treating this as fraud by a rogue employee versus criminal negligence by management." The restoration process began immediately, but I quickly discovered that Brad's sabotage had been more extensive and deliberate than anyone realized. Working with Marcus and my former team, I accessed backup systems that Brad had supposedly deleted during his transition. Marcus Brad told everyone he had deleted the old system files to prevent rollbacks, but these core database files are still intact. He didn't actually delete anything, he just corrupted the file headers so the new software couldn't read them. The revelation that Brad had lied about deleting the original system provided additional evidence of deliberate sabotage. Federal investigators documented every aspect of his deception, building a case that could shift criminal liability from Morrison Financial's executives to Brad personally. But with 2 hours remaining until the payroll deadline, I realized the complexity of rebuilding the commission calculation formulas from corrupted data. Morrison Financial's sales team had compensation structures that involved base salaries plus percentage bonuses tied to individual performance team achievement levels and overall company profitability metrics. "Sarah, I need you to pull every sales report from the past 3 months. The commission calculations involve interactions between quarterly sales targets, territory performance bonuses, and profit-sharing percentages. If I can't rebuild these formulas accurately, Tom Bradley and the other salespeople won't get their correct commissions." Tom Bradley, our top salesman who had been ready to jump to a competitor, was watching my restoration work with intense interest. His November commission should have been approximately $9,400 based on his sales performance, but Brad's system had calculated negative earnings. "Vivian, I want to apologize for not supporting you when Brad was attacking your work," Tom said quietly. I knew your calculations were always perfect because my commissions were always exactly what I expected based on my sales numbers. I should have spoken up when he called your system primitive. Working against the deadline, I systematically restored each component of the payroll system while documenting every error that Brad's software had created. The overtime calculations for warehouse workers required rebuilding complex formulas that handled different overtime rules across 3 states. The benefits integration needed restoration of links between payroll deductions and insurance company reporting. The tax calculations required re-establishing connections to current federal and state tax tables. With 45 minutes until deadline, I discovered the most damaging aspect of Brad's sabotage. He had deliberately changed Morrison Financial's federal tax identification number in the new system, causing all tax deposits and reports to be filed under an incorrect identifier. Agent Williams, this explains why your investigation began so quickly. Brad's system was reporting Morrison Financial's payroll taxes under a tax ID number that belongs to a different company entirely. The IRS received reports showing that we weren't depositing any taxes at all when actually our taxes were being deposited under the wrong identification. The discovery provided the final piece of evidence federal investigators needed to completely exonerate Morrison Financial and shift all criminal liability to Brad Sullivan. His deliberate alteration of the federal tax ID constituted fraud against both Morrison Financial and the federal government. With 15 minutes to spare, I completed the payroll restoration and initiated the processing sequence that would deliver correct paychecks to 300 employees. Every complex commission calculation was restored to precision. Every overtime payment was calculated according to appropriate state laws. Every tax withholding and benefits deduction was processed correctly. As the payroll system confirmed successful processing, the conference room erupted in applause from executives who had spent 4 days facing potential bankruptcy and criminal prosecution. Federal investigators confirmed that Morrison Financial had successfully corrected all reporting errors and would face no penalties for Brad's fraudulent implementation. But my victory extended far beyond just saving Friday's payroll. Agent Williams explained that my documentation had provided sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against Brad Sullivan for computer fraud, tax fraud, and violation of federal labor laws. Ms. Carter, your technical expertise and detailed documentation have potentially saved Morrison Financial from millions of dollars in penalties and prevented criminal prosecution of executives who were defrauded by their own employee. Your work today demonstrates exactly why experienced professionals should never be dismissed in favor of credentials alone. Tom Bradley received his correct commission of $9,387. Patricia Williams got her paycheck with accurate overtime calculations that allowed her to pay rent and child care. James Rodriguez received the overtime pay needed for his daughter's college tuition. 300 families discovered that their financial security had been restored by someone the company had fired for being outdated. As Friday afternoon arrived with payroll successfully completed and federal investigations concluded, I realized that my firing had ultimately led to complete vindication of my expertise and methods. Morrison Financial had learned that years of experience and demonstrated competence were more valuable than any MBA or consultant presentation. The company that had discarded my knowledge was now completely dependent on my expertise for their continued survival. 6 months later, Morrison Financial had been transformed into a model of operational excellence and institutional respect for expertise, with my position as payroll director serving as the foundation for broader organizational improvements that benefited every employee and client. The immediate aftermath of my restoration success had been remarkably satisfying. Brad Sullivan faced federal charges for computer fraud, tax fraud, and violations of federal labor laws. His deliberately fraudulent implementation cost him not only his job, but also his professional reputation and potential prison time. The MBA program where he had earned his degree was notified about his fraudulent resume claims and academic misconduct. Brad became unemployable in finance and served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing credentials over competence. My new position as payroll director came with complete authority over all payroll-related systems and processes. I implemented comprehensive safeguards to prevent future disasters, including mandatory testing periods for any system changes, documentation requirements for all modifications, and approval processes that required sign-off from multiple departments before implementation. The salary increase had solved my immediate financial crisis and provided long-term security that allowed me to focus on excellent work rather than economic survival. Morrison Financial's executive health plan covered my mother's chemotherapy treatments without the stress of insurance limitations or coverage gaps. Mom's cancer had responded well to treatment and was now in remission, allowing us both to focus on the future rather than survival. But the organizational changes at Morrison Financial extended far beyond payroll. Mr. Morrison implemented new policies requiring extensive consultation with experienced employees before making major operational changes. The company established a technology advisory board with permanent seats for department heads and senior staff who understood how systems actually functioned rather than how they appeared in consultant presentations. My role as permanent chair of the technology advisory board gave me veto power over any changes affecting payroll systems or related processes. No future MBA with modernization plans could override my expertise or implement changes without proving they understood the complexity and integration requirements involved. The employee culture at Morrison Financial had been strengthened by the crisis and its resolution. Workers across all departments gained appreciation for institutional knowledge and experienced colleagues. The near disaster created solidarity between management and staff based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority. Tom Bradley not only stayed with Morrison Financial, but became one of my strongest advocates within the sales department. His experience with Brad's catastrophic commission calculations gave him deep appreciation for the complexity and precision of proper payroll systems. Tom frequently referred potential clients to Morrison Financial specifically because of our attention to detail and operational excellence. Patricia Williams was promoted to supervisor in customer service with additional responsibilities that included training new employees about company policies and procedures. Her loyalty during the crisis and relief at keeping her job translated into exceptional performance that benefited the entire department. James Rodriguez became our warehouse operations manager with authority over scheduling and overtime assignments that relied on my payroll systems for accurate compensation calculations. James understood better than anyone how proper payroll management affected real families and real lives. The broader impact of Morrison Financial's crisis extended beyond our company to become a case study in business schools across the country. Harvard Business School invited me to speak at a seminar titled The Value of Institutional Knowledge in Digital Transformation, where MBA students learned about the dangers of dismissing experienced employees in favor of theoretical solutions. I received invitations to speak at professional conferences about payroll system management compliance requirements and the importance of gradual implementation with extensive testing. My experience became an example of how expertise developed through years of practical work could be more valuable than formal credentials or consultant recommendations. The speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities with other companies facing similar modernization challenges. I helped organizations evaluate new payroll systems and develop implementation timelines that respected both innovation needs and operational stability. My expertise, which Brad had dismissed as outdated, became recognized as essential knowledge for successful system transitions. Morrison Financial's client relationships had been strengthened by our crisis and recovery. Henderson Manufacturing, Pacific Coast Logistics, and Desert States Construction all renewed their contracts with additional services after witnessing our ability to recover from disaster and maintain accurate financial reporting under federal investigation. Our response to crisis demonstrated competence and reliability that attracted new clients seeking stable financial services partners. The federal investigation had concluded with Morrison Financial receiving commendation from the Department of Labor for cooperation with investigators and implementation of improved compliance procedures. Agent Williams specifically praised our documentation and technical expertise as exemplary for companies of our size and complexity. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from my colleagues and the employees whose financial security I had restored. The company organized a celebration dinner where Mr. Morrison publicly acknowledged that firing me had been the worst decision in Morrison Financial's 30-year history, and that rehiring me had saved the company from destruction. Vivian Carter represents everything that Morrison Financial should value in our employees, Mr. Morrison announced to the assembled staff. Expertise earned through years of dedicated work commitment to excellence and the courage to defend proper procedures, even when facing opposition from people with impressive credentials but limited understanding. The life lesson that emerged from my experience was profound and applicable beyond corporate environments. I learned that expertise built through years of dedicated work cannot be replaced by credentials alone, and that defending proper procedures often requires courage to oppose people in positions of authority. Most importantly, I discovered that the greatest opportunities sometimes come disguised as devastating setbacks. Being fired for defending my principles had ultimately led to professional recognition, financial security, and the satisfaction of work that truly mattered to hundreds of people. Standing up for what's right, even when it seems costly in the short term, ultimately leads to success and respect that no amount of education or credentials can provide. Real expertise is demonstrated through results rather than titles, and competence earned through experience is more valuable than knowledge acquired through textbooks. My mother's recovery and our financial stability allowed me to appreciate how professional vindication felt even sweeter when it came with the knowledge that I had saved not just my own career, but the livelihoods of 300 families who depended on Morrison Financial for their economic security. 6 months after being escorted out with a cardboard box, I had become indispensable to Morrison Financial and respected throughout our industry for expertise that no MBA program could teach. The company that had discarded my knowledge was now completely dependent on my leadership for their continued success. And when headhunters called offering positions as Chief Information Officer at major corporations, I politely declined, explaining that Morrison Financial appreciated my expertise and had given me the authority to build something truly excellent for people who truly mattered. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being too valuable to replace. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where your experience and expertise were dismissed in favor of someone with impressive credentials but no practical knowledge? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you and reminded you of the importance of respecting experience and institutional knowledge, please give it a like to help others find it. Subscribe to hear more stories about workplace challenges and how expertise triumphs over arrogance. And if you know someone who's been undervalued at work or facing similar challenges with new management, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story about how being fired for defending proper procedures ultimately led to complete professional vindication. I hope it reminds you that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, ultimately leads to success and respect that can't be taken away by people who mistake credentials for competence. Remember that your expertise and experience have real value, especially when they protect the people and systems that matter most.